It's 1984, Apple have just launched the Macintosh, Terminator is in the cinemas, and Maserati have just launched the Biturbo Spyder. The Biturbo, or Biturbo in Italian, was the world's first twin-turbocharged production car. It was a whole new approach for Maserati, trying to bring it into the modern era. It has the dubious honour of being included in the BBC's Crap Cars book, and it was voted Time magazine's worst car of 1984. I could talk in depth about that story, but for this video, let's try and concentrate specifically on the Spyder. If you have, though, a Biturbo of the 80s, early 90s, please get in touch with me because I want to do more on these cars. It is Zagato styled and assembled. It's based on the coupe, but being 4 inches shorter, it is strictly a two-seater. In the mid-80s, this car would have cost you £29,000. That puts it squarely in the territory of the Mercedes R107 SL and the Jag XJS V12. So that's already quite a steep mountain for this to climb. There are those who dislike the looks, and certainly it is very 80s, very angular. But to me, I've always found it to be a clean, at the very least, an interesting design. I really quite like them. These actually started off selling pretty well for Maserati, but after 3 or 4 years, it became apparent that there was lots of issues, mainly to do with quality and reliability. And that put a little bit of a dampener on things. Now, this one was sold in 91, but it's a 1989 model year. So it has the 3-valve 2.8 litre engine. That puts out 225 horsepower, which is a nice gain on the normal foreign market 2.5, which had 190 horsepower. This is considered the most reliable engine as well. Because it had been in production for a while, it should be improved. This one, as you can see, is an auto, which is something that I would ordinarily really hate. But in the Spyder version, I think it actually quite suits it. Now, the thing is, these are renowned for not having much structural rigidity. I think part of the reason why they made it shorter was to try and help with that. They haven't really succeeded. Even over a few meters on this road, you can feel a bit of scuttle shake. It's coming through the wheel. This is not a stiff car, so it's not a car you're going to be driving hard. As such, having an auto in this application is a good thing. I have driven cars with this engine before. One thing that strikes me slightly is that at lower speeds, driven calmly, it doesn't sound particularly special. There's nothing wrong with it as such, but I don't think there's anything there telling you from start up to just driving off that this is, you know, a V6 bi-turbo lump. It sounds quite average, really. Driving position for me is compromised. I already knew it would be. I've driven a few Biturbos and it's not really their strong point on any of them. But let's see how that 2.8 litre engine feels. Like a lot of turbos from this era, it feels stronger than it ought to be with just 225 horsepower. That's because of the way that power is delivered. And still, considering this is an open top car and that, you know, I put my foot down there, I'm a little bit disappointed by the sound. It's not bad, it just doesn't feel special. The ride isn't up to scratch. I think having that flexible body probably makes it difficult for them to fine tune it, but it's got a really weird combination of having an inherent softness whilst picking up every single sort of little dip and undulation in the road. I don't know if you could see earlier in the camera when it was the bumpier bit, the camera was shaking so much, more so than in many full-on sports cars that I've been in. But surprisingly, it's not an uncomfortable place to be. I adore this interior. I think that it's one of my favorite of all time. The fact that you have the half Alcantara dash in that lovely blue with the cream leather, there's wood everywhere. That amazing clock, which by the way, this one is still the one with the Swiss mechanism inside. In later Ghiblis, they just had, I think, a Japanese battery operated mechanism. So it is quite a thing. But it's the mixture, it's the madness in here. It's the mixture of, in some ways, let's face it, lack of quality. And this car's supposed to have 54,000 miles, but if you look around, some bits are more worn than they should be, with the opulence, which you will just, I don't think you're going to find that combination anywhere else. You have the little control panel there, which at the time must have been quite futuristic. It doesn't have proper buttons. It's got those little flat panels like a ZX Spectrum of that era. And overall though, bit of a weird driving position, too much of a stretch, legs are a bit pushed up, but I'm not finding it uncomfortable. I love the instruments as well, with the blue background and the colour, the little turbo gauge right in the middle of the dash. Let's just do another little pull through the gears. Oh, it's an auto. Let's just, I'm going to put my foot down and we'll go up the road again, see how it feels, and I'll tell you a little bit about the handling as well. The steering has the same vagueness that afflicts other Biturbos of this era that I've tried, and it wallows a little bit in the corners, which, as I said, is so odd because the ride is pretty bitsy. But there's a certain charm in it, and this isn't the kind of car that you're really going to throw around expecting it to be scalpel sharp. So in a way, it kind of works better in this car that you're not going to drive it too hard, because dynamically it is flawed. But it's just immensely lovable, even just driving it around like this. You know, I just love this thing because it's so characterful, and I don't think there's anything else that you could take anywhere and it would just be so special, so unique. There's hardly any of these around, so you can be sure if you go to a car meet or whatever, you know, there'll be all the Ferraris, everything else that everybody's already seen a billion times, and nobody will have seen this. And I really do think it is an attractive thing, and perhaps it went through an unfashionable stage a few years ago, but now those lines are so clean, so sharp, so tidy. I think it's great. It doesn't have the same presence, I would say, on the road as those competitors that I mentioned before. So the SLC, not SLC, the Merc 107 SL and the XJS both have more presence on the road. Quite frankly, they're also better cars. But this feels like a very, very special thing. The interior is fabulous. It looks great. Now, I know this may sound a little bit ridiculous as well, but this is the most comfortable armrest I've ever used. It's an overstuffed thing, a bit like the seats, but it just gives you an idea of the madness of Maserati in this era. So the engine sound is a little bit of a disappointment, but I suspect it's also partly dulled by having the auto gearbox and the torque converter, which just changes the way an engine revs. It takes away a little bit of the harder edge. But what I'm really liking about this engine is that it seems to sit in most gears around 2,700 revs. At that range, if you put your foot down, the torque from the turbo is there immediately. The engine doesn't even need to kick down. And between that and torque, it's a really nice way to make progress. Now, maybe they weren't the most reliable things, but the roof at least is very quick and easy to put up. So that gives you a modicum of practicality. Now, we have to be honest here, dynamically, this is not a good car, and yet I really like it. Why? As a wafter then, some of its major faults don't really worry you as much. So the steering is quite woolly, it's quite imprecise, and worst of all I think is the scuttle shake that just takes away the feel of quality and luxury that you should have in a car like this. I know that open top cars from that era were bad, but this one is particularly bad. But those things just don't matter as much when you're just sort of going through the countryside, reveling in that little bit of turbo shove without going too far, just making use of the lovely mid-range on it, the effortless nature. As flawed as they are, I like these Biturbo cars so much that I have been toying with the idea of buying one, and there is a viewer in France, Jeremy, who has one. I think it's a 222E, who offered it to me and I almost got it. In the end, I think the problem I found is just that it's such a difficult market for these. You may have it on there for, you know, months before you get anyone who's interested in buying. It's not that they're not desirable cars, it's just that the pool of people interested in them is quite small. So on my side, I couldn't risk getting something that if I had to move it on, I might have had to hold on to for years. But when you're talking about prices, again, they are absolutely all over the place. So it's very hard to price. If you're interested in one of these, have a look. They're few and far between. And you can see them for anything from, I'm not just talking about the Spyder, the Biturbo in general as well, from 3,000 to 20, 25,000. One thing I would say, if you're going to buy one, absolutely buy the best you can. I think the later cars were much better built than the earlier ones. They're much more reliable. The 3-valve engine, I think, is one of the better ones, but I think a lot of the things that can go wrong can be expensive to fix, and obviously bits of interior and so on are not easy to find. I don't want to discourage you though, because I think they're cars that should be looked after and cherished as an integral part of Italian car history. Thank you so much to Nick for bringing it down. He's also the chap who brought me the Griffith before. What a contrast between these two, but he adores both of them. He actually won this in one of those car raffles, so what a lovely thing. He's going through it, sorting out a few little things here and there, but on the whole, he absolutely loves it. Thank you all so much for watching. Look forward to seeing you for the next video, and if you have a Biturbo, please get in touch with me.